What if I told you that the most powerful military force on Earth is not being defeated on the battlefield, but is instead being slowly trapped inside a system where every move it makes costs exponentially more than the move it is trying to stop? And almost nobody is noticing the real mechanism behind this unfolding crisis. Because right now, while the world is busy watching explosions, missiles, and dramatic headlines, a much more dangerous game is unfolding beneath the surface. A game where economics, psychology, and long-term strategy are quietly overpowering raw firepower in ways that could reshape global power itself. And here's the part that should genuinely disturb you, because if this pattern continues, it will not just decide the outcome of this conflict. It could redefine how future wars are fought and won without ever looking like traditional victories. Stay with me, because what you are about to see is not just a war story, it is a blueprint, a system, and possibly the beginning of a new kind of global confrontation that rewards patience over power and strategy over strength. In just a matter of weeks, the United States has unleashed massive firepower, firing hundreds upon hundreds of high-end cruise missiles, each one representing not just military intent, but an enormous financial cost that keeps stacking higher with every passing day. These are not cheap weapons. These are some of the most expensive precision systems ever created. And using them at this scale is not just a show of force, it is a drain, a calculated burn of resources that cannot be replaced quickly or easily. Now here is where the imbalance begins to reveal itself in a way that most people completely overlook. On the other side, Iran is not matching this with equally expensive systems. Instead, it is deploying tools that cost a fraction, sometimes hundreds of times cheaper, yet still force the United States and its allies to respond with extremely expensive defensive measures. This means every single exchange is not equal, it is tilted, and it is tilted in a way that slowly bleeds the side that appears stronger on paper. And that is not an accident, that is the strategy. Because this war is not designed to be won in a single moment, it is designed to stretch, to pressure, to exhaust, and to force the opponent into a position where continuing becomes more damaging than stopping. Now think about that carefully, because it changes everything about how you interpret what is happening. This is not about domination, this is about endurance. This is not about overwhelming force, this is about controlled pressure. And this is exactly why the situation becomes more dangerous the longer it continues. But to understand how we got here, you need to go back decades, because none of this was built overnight, and none of this is random. After the devastating Iran-Iraq war, Iran came to a realization that shaped its entire future doctrine. A realization that facing stronger powers directly was not just risky, it was unsustainable. So, instead of preparing for direct confrontation, Iran began building something far more complex, far more patient, and far more difficult to dismantle. It started spreading influence, building alliances, embedding networks, and creating multiple layers of indirect power across the region. These were not temporary moves, these were long-term placements, pieces positioned carefully across a geopolitical chessboard that most of the world was not even paying attention to. While global attention was focused on nuclear negotiations and sanctions, something else was quietly expanding in the background. A network, a system, a pressure architecture designed to activate when needed. And now, that system is active. When the United States launched its initial wave of strikes, the expectation was clear. Overwhelming force would create rapid collapse, leadership would be neutralized, systems would break down, and resistance would fade quickly. For a very brief moment, it even looked like that expectation might come true. The scale of the attack was massive, the intensity was unprecedented, and the messaging around it suggested absolute dominance. But then something unexpected happened. Iran did not fall, the system did not collapse, the retaliation did not stop. Instead, it adapted, absorbed, and responded. And that is when the narrative shifted from power to resilience. Because now the question is no longer how hard the United States can hit. The real question is how long it can keep hitting at this cost. And this is where the numbers become more powerful than the weapons themselves. A single low-cost drone can trigger a multi-million-dollar response. A swarm of cheap systems can force billions in defensive spending. A small, repeated action can create a massive, repeated cost. This is not just asymmetry. This is engineered imbalance. And that imbalance is the core weapon being used in this conflict. Now here comes the first major rehook, because what you are about to realize changes the entire map of this war. The main battlefield is not where most people think it is. It is not just in the skies over Iran. It is not just in missile exchanges. It is not even primarily military. The real battlefield is economic. In its center is a narrow stretch of water that controls a massive portion of the world's energy flow. The Strait of Hormuz. This single location has the power to disrupt global markets faster than any bombing campaign ever could. And the most shocking part is how easily that disruption can happen without even physically blocking it. Iran does not need to sink ships. It does not need to deploy massive fleets. It only needs to create enough uncertainty that the financial system shuts the route down on its own. And that is exactly what happens when insurers pull coverage, when shipping companies hesitate, and when risk becomes too high to calculate. Trade slows, then it stops, then panic begins. And once panic begins, the consequences spread globally. Oil prices react, markets react, governments react, and suddenly a regional conflict becomes a global economic event. This is where the real power lies, not in destroying infrastructure, but in disrupting confidence. Because once confidence breaks, systems begin to fail without being physically attacked. And that is far more efficient than any missile strike. Now here comes the second escalation, and this is where things become even more complex. Iran is not applying pressure in just one direction. It is applying pressure in multiple layers simultaneously. Military pressure through strikes and drones, political pressure through targeting allied states, economic pressure through energy disruption, and psychological pressure through unpredictability. Each layer amplifies the others. Each layer makes the system harder to stabilize. Each layer increases the overall cost of response. And together, they create a situation where the opponent is forced to defend everything at once. That is not just strategy, that is overload. And overload is one of the fastest ways to break even the strongest systems. Because no matter how powerful you are, defending everywhere at the same time is always more expensive than attacking selectively. That is the trap. And once you are inside that trap, every decision becomes harder. Do you escalate and spend more? Do you pull back and risk losing influence? Do you expand the war and risk global consequences? Or do you continue and accept the slow bleed? There is no easy answer. And that is exactly how this system was designed. Now here is the part that connects this entire conflict directly to everyday life, and this is where the stakes become real for everyone watching. Energy disruption does not stay in the energy sector. It spreads into transportation, into manufacturing, into agriculture, into food, into daily cost of living. Because when fuel rises, everything rises. And when everything rises, pressure builds inside every economy connected to that system. That means this war is not just being fought by soldiers. It is being felt by consumers, by businesses, by governments, by entire populations. That is what makes it global. Now here comes the most dangerous rehook of all, because this is the escalation almost nobody is talking about. Water. In the Gulf region, water is not naturally abundant, it is produced. Massive desalination systems convert seawater into drinking water for millions of people every single day. These systems are critical, and they are vulnerable. If these systems are targeted, the impact is not just economic. It is humanitarian. It is societal. It is existential. And here is the strategic imbalance. Iran is less dependent on these systems compared to its neighbors. That means any threat to desalination infrastructure creates asymmetric pressure. And asymmetric pressure is the core theme of this entire war. Cheap versus expensive. Distributed versus centralized, patient versus reactive. And once again, the advantage shifts toward the side that can apply pressure more efficiently. Now step back and look at the full picture, because this is where everything connects. A war that started with missiles is now influencing oil markets, shipping routes, insurance systems, food production, and potentially water security. That is not a localized conflict. That is systemic disruption. And systemic disruption is far harder to control than direct confrontation. On the American side, the cost continues to rise, not just financially, but strategically and politically. Advanced systems are being used at high rates. Maintenance cycles are increasing. Losses, even if limited, are symbolically powerful. Public opinion becomes a factor, and political pressure begins to build. Because at some point, every war reaches a moment where the question is no longer, can we continue? The question becomes, should we continue? And that moment is approaching faster than most people realize. Because without a clear, defined victory, every additional day becomes harder to justify. And without a coalition, the burden becomes even heavier. That is the reality now. The objective was quick dominance. The result is prolonged pressure. The expectation was collapse. The outcome is endurance. And endurance favors the side that planned for it. So now the final question remains, and it is the most important one in this entire story. Not who is stronger, not who can strike harder, but who can last longer without breaking. Because in this kind of war, survival is victory. And forcing your opponent to spend more than they can sustain is a form of winning that does not look like winning until it is too late. If you made it this far, you already understand that this is not just a conflict. It is a shift in how power works in the modern world. So now I want your opinion. Do you think this strategy can actually outlast a superpower, or will the balance eventually flip? Like this video if you found it eye-opening. Share it with someone who needs to understand what is really happening. Drop your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe to Market Mindset for more deep, powerful breakdowns like this.